Okay, this is a lecture for Principles of Marketing. Channels and Partner Ecosystems is the topic for today. We have finished, of course, the first half of the course regarding understanding the market, and now we're moving along in ways that we can shape the market. And one way, of course, that we can shape, influence the market is through partners. And how we actually enter the market, and those are channels. We'll talk about these two very important topics, they're related topics today, channels and partner ecosystems. Prior to the lecture, we had discussed about the marketing plan and organizing the groups, and you've already started to do that. And these are the components of the marketing plan that need to be presented. As I emphasize, this project is an excellent project to practice online collaboration with your fellow students, to practice online presentation, because even if the COVID situation ends, this sort of working will continue to be a significant part of your educational and professional careers. So this is a good opportunity to practice that. So we'll do a quick review from the last lecture on marketing communications. What is marketing communications? What are the objectives, positioning, and execution? So as mentioned, marketing communications is part of promotion. It's the promotion side of the marketing mix, the so-called 4 Ps, being product, price, place. And promotion is one of the key elements of the 4 Ps. That includes advertising, developing and training the sales force, resourcing the sales force, publicity, public relations, sales promotion, and so forth. There are many aspects to marketing communications and promotion. And the topic for later in this lecture will be the 4th P, which will be place. Notice channel here. But in this review, we're talking about promotion. Marketing communications, sometimes called MarCom, is the messages, the totality of messages and media deployed to communicate with the market, in particular, how products and services are promoted. When we started this course and we asked the class, what is marketing? Most of you, many of you responded that it's advertising. Some were talking about sales, but advertising is only one part of marketing. As you can see from this chart, but it's a very important part. It is the message your organization is going to convey to the market. So marketing communications has many aspects, including advertising, direct marketing, branding, packaging, the online presence, including social networking, printed materials, public relations activities, sales presentations, sponsorships, and that's related to partnerships, we'll talk later, trade show appearances, and more. It's also important to note that most of this discussion has been about external marketing. In other words, communicating with the market, the outside of the company. But there's also an area that's very important of internal marketing. And internal marketing refers to what you tell your employees. What is the culture, the mission, the vision, the values and organization of the company, internal marketing. And of course, there's communications related to that. And even small companies and startups, if you're an entrepreneur with a startup, you have 4 people in the company, you need to communicate this vision and mission, communicate the strategy, and that's a form of internal marketing. So marketing is it's not just advertising. Obviously, we've learned that over the course of this class. And then there's also the internal marketing. But in this lecture last week and in this review, we focused mostly on external marketing. So what are the objectives of marketing communication? To create, sustain demand and preference for a product, to position the product, and we'll talk about positioning very closely, and to build a brand. And we'll have a whole lecture later on branding, a separate lecture, because that's very important. And that is a component of marketing communications. So positioning creates the image of your company's product in the mind of your target customer, a set of tools and processes to influence and control the market's perception of the product. Remember, we talked about shaping the market. So marketing communications is a very important part of shaping the market. This is a picture of a basketball, and you can, professional basketball, you can see obviously positioning is very critical to getting the rebound, making the shot, staying away from the defense, penetrating the defense. Positioning is the single greatest influence on the customer's buying decision. And as we mentioned, it's very much in the mind of the customer. In the lecture last week, we showed the video of the introduction of the Macintosh computer, Steve Jobs' video at the Super Bowl in 1984, to position the Macintosh as being outside the corporate standard, positioning it, just like this basketball player, in a market segment of people who want to think differently, think creatively outside that sort of corporate world of the IBM PC and the PC compatible computers. And so indeed, as many people, we still know that the Macintosh and the iMac and so forth, the derivatives of that original computer positioned people who are in more creative fields or feel more creative, and so forth. So that positioning persists to this day, even from the beginning, from that commercial. Now you position the product and you make a strategy or decision on where you want to position the product in the mind of the customer, as we described, not on the basketball court, but in the mind of the customer. So we need to communicate that positioning in a comprehensive way along a number of dimensions. So we want to define the product, what it is, what is the benefit, and what it means, what is the effect on the customer, and why should the customer be motivated to purchase that product. And the buying process is a very key aspect of marketing communication. Understanding from a behavioral standpoint how purchase decisions are made and executed is very important for making successful sale, and the marketing supports that by targeting marketing communications to all aspects of the buying process, from the customer recognizing the need, problem recognition, to positioning that when the customer recognizes the need, that your product or service is positioned to answer that need. So being in search engines, being in the with key opinion leaders, in the trade journals, and so forth, so that when people are looking to solve that problem, they will find your product or service as a solution. In the marketing communication, to also address the alternatives. We talked about earlier with strategy that not doing anything, or competitors, of course, are very strong influences on the success of your product. So you need to address those issues. And in your marketing plans, you should definitely look at what will be competitive aspects. So for example, if you're doing a marketing plan around wearing masks for COVID-19, well, what are the alternatives? And not wearing a mask, wearing the mask improperly, wearing the mask sometimes. And so you want to address those alternatives and position your marketing message that makes it most effective. So when people are sitting alone in their home, they don't need to wear the mask, of course. And so you want to adjust to what those alternatives are and make the most effective marketing communication. And of course, related to the purchase decision and any post-purchase activities and evaluation. Marketing messages should have an iterative aspect to them. By iterative, I mean that you test the market, get some feedback, send out the message in some medium, and then evaluate what is the effect on that audience. And that circular iteration is very important. So you are constantly updating and improving that message. Sounds obvious, but it's a little bit of a challenge because you don't want to be updating and changing so that you send a confusing message. You want to be updating, changing, so you send a more effective message, but staying uh, uh, connected to the essential point that you're trying to make. So you don't have the product in the mind, the product positioning getting confused or potentially diluted. So constant improvement of the marketing messaging is important, but at the same rate, keeping it consistent and coherent is also important. So that is balance is very challenging. As we've consistently emphasized, the message is driven by customer value. It's not just your product or your technology, your marketing masks. And you might say, well, I have the best mask, and that's what our value proposition is. But maybe the customer is not really looking for the best mask. People don't look out and say, I want to get a best mask today. No, they want to minimize risk. They want to feel comfortable. They want to fit with the social expectations. They may want to even have a design statement. These are considerations that may seem secondary to protection from virus and so forth, or protecting others from the virus, but actually become the primary motivation. So it's not about your product or technology. It's not even about the solution. It's how you solve the customer's problems and their perceptions of what they want. So that's a review of marketing communications. Let's continue with channels and partner ecosystems, the topic for today's lecture. We'll be talking about an overview and definitions. We'll be talking about types of marketing channels, a very important topic called disintermediation, because marketing channels can involve many steps, and those steps have intermediate steps. Disintermediation is the process of taking out those intervening steps, which we'll talk about, the so-called middlemen. We'll discuss alliances and partner ecosystems, an extremely important and increasing part of marketing. The idea of an isolated startup just selling the product in the fourth industrial revolution, with increasing convergence and combination of products and services, is becoming less and less realistic, or I should say it's becoming more and more obsolete. Even large companies and startups will make partnerships in order to enhance the marketing. And we're going to go over some examples of this. So this is an extremely important lecture in that regard because it reflects the future of marketing, which is very much partnership marketing. So some overview and definitions. What is a marketing channel? What are partnership ecosystems? So marketing channel, we've talked about the 4 Ps, is part of place. So in the 4 Ps, we have the product. So in order to create good marketing, you have to have a good product. And marketing is part of product development. In order to have a good position in the market, you need to determine the price and the pricing strategy. And we had a whole lecture on that, the strategy and tactics of pricing. And then from the previous lecture, and then we'll talk also about branding, you need to promote that product. But another way that can make success or failure in marketing is the placement of that product. Is the product going to be online or offline? So for example, let's talk about education. Education as a service. Some can call it a product. And we have 2 channels to deliver this education, to deliver this product. We have the offline channel, the classroom, and we have the online channel. And of course, marketing strategy has not determined the fact that now the channel or delivery of the product is online. That decision has been determined by the epidemiology of COVID-19. and regulations and so on and so forth. Now, many people may regard the offline channel as superior, and there are advantages to that, but there are also advantages to the online channel. Convenience, we're recording the lectures, you can watch the lectures, you can be in your own room, your own home, and so forth. So there are advantages and disadvantages to each of them. So online university, offline university, these are two different channels, and they offer advantages and disadvantages that I described. So a marketing strategy would be, how are we going to position our product? Is it going to be offline or online? Now, one might say that originally the old way, offline would be superior, but perhaps online will be the future, and top universities will embrace that and improve their online approaches. Or there may be a mix. There's many products that are both online and offline. And see, these are channel decisions. When it's offline, are we talking about stores? Are we talking about delivery? Are we talking about classrooms? Are we talking about books? We can also deliver education through books, through lectures, through student-based, problem-based learning, many different approaches. So this is the placement. Placement also relates to aspects of inventory, logistics, and distribution, which we'll talk a little bit less about. But how do we distribute the product, distribution channels? We'll discuss a little bit in this lecture. So in summary, a marketing channel is the people, organization, processes, and activities necessary to transfer the product or service from the company essentially to the point of consumption. It is how products and services get from the manufacturer or the source to the end user or the customer. Another way to think of it is as a distribution channel. And as I emphasized, marketing channels are crucial for an effective and well-planned marketing strategy. So in your marketing plan, you need to really establish what is going to be our marketing channel. So if you want to set up a chicken and beer franchise in Korea we call it chimek, as you know, as some of you may know. So most of those are established stores. Well, given the new market dynamics with the COVID-19 and perhaps other pandemics, should we position this more as an online delivery? Or should we have, people really want to go to restaurants and they want to socialize. In fact, there might be increased demand. People are so stressed and frustrated with this lockdown or social distancing. They want to go to the restaurant. So do we position a new chicken and beer franchise with outdoor seating? And of course, there's winter time, it gets cold and so forth. So you can figure out some ways to do that. So how are we going to deliver that chicken and beer? You can even do, maybe people are staying at home and they got used to cooking at home. You can say, you can have a Korean style chicken and beer, but you just put in the microwave, not the beer, but the chicken. And you'll have authentic tasting Korean chicken, fried chicken experience, but you can do it at home, and cook it at home at your own time instead of delivery. These are all different channels to execute. So what is your strategy? How do you choose the channel? Well, that's, as I mentioned, the strategy, and that's going to be based on this market analysis, this environmental analysis. So how people make purchase decisions, what do people want, what are the trends, what are the technology trends, what are the social trends, how is COVID-19 influencing that? That's the marketing strategy, and that influences what type of marketing channel you will utilize. So that's a marketing channel. What are partner ecosystems? So partner ecosystems include the channels which are transaction-based to get the distribution out there, whether it's online, offline, etc. We'll talk about in more detail. And alliances, the distinction, are more relationship-based or interaction-based. So you have a closer interaction and exchange of ideas and co-marketing and so forth in uh, partnership alliances. So there's a relationship between channels and alliances, but they are different. Channels are transaction-based and alliances are more relationship or interaction-based. So this is a framework for understanding all of this. On the transaction side, we have channels. This is on the left. And on the interaction side, we have partnerships or alliances on the right. And then we can also regard our market presence as being either focused or niche up here, or very broad at the bottom. And those would be the market entry objectives. And we can enhance our objectives and our market share along these lines by transactions-based channels and interaction-based alliances. So for example, if we have a very niche market, very focused market, the transaction channels can deliver more value to that niche. We can have the channels so that if somebody wants to get chicken and beer, and we can work with a distributor to then send it out to them, and within 1 hour of the phone call or 30 minutes of the phone call, etc., that increases the value. With an alliance, we can have more depth in that niche market. So for example, let's say you want to serve elderly people, older people who might have limited mobility or cannot interact as much because of potential infection risk. Well, you can make an alliance with elderly community centers. And those elderly community centers and a distributor can focus on sending out the message, informing their constituents, their people in their network of this chicken and beer opportunity, and you become the preferred provider with some elderly care organization. That would be a partnership so that you can increase the depth for that niche market. Now, if we have a broad strategy, we want to reach a wide market, we can also use channels to increase the volume. And one way to do is to do multiple channels. So we have wider extension into the market. And then we can also work with alliances with organizations, with the schools, with government to reach out more broadly in the market. So those are the ways that the channels and partnerships can expand market share. So they can aim for broad distribution, emphasizing volume and reach, or niche distribution, aiming for value and depth. So we have several different types of marketing channels. We have B2C markets, business to consumer. We have B2B markets, business to business markets. And then there are various variations. Those are the two major ones. We have B2C to B, which we'll talk about, B2G, which is business to government, and so forth. So these are the two major ones. Either you provide direct to the consumer, B2C, or you work with other businesses, B2B. Ultimately, they intersect with the consumer. So if we look at the B2C market, we have within the B2C market various distribution channels. So you're the producer and you can go direct to the consumer in this manner. You can also work through a retailer, a store, or an online retailer. So many people now use Amazon as the online retailer, or it could be a store, as I mentioned. A producer can go to a wholesaler, which then goes to a retailer. Producer can go to a distributor that goes to a retailer. And then there can also be an agent or broker that connects to a wholesaler and then ultimately to the consumer. So these are different channels that involve increasing complexity and more intermediates. The ideal channel in many ways, because you minimize the sharing of the value chain, you minimize the sharing of the value added, is the direct channel where you go directly from the producer to the consumer. And these other channels, which involve some intermediates, are indirect channels. So in the B2B market, or B2G, we have a similar framework. Namely, we have producer going to a business or government. So this would be Boeing selling to an airline, a hospital equipment manufacturer selling to directly to hospitals, and or a military contractor selling tanks to the government. That would be the B2G. And again, those can have direct as well as indirect channels. Now you might say, well, even though this direct channel has the most opportunity to keep the value of the entire value chain with the producer, there are, of course, advantages to the indirect channel.
Oh.
Is there a question? There are advantages to the indirect channel. So if you are a very engineering-driven company focusing on the product, and you don't want to spend a lot of money on sales and marketing and effort, and it's not your core competency, etc., you may decide to work with, obviously, a retailer or wholesaler. If you don't want to own the real estate or the stores, again, you would allow a retailer. So the designers in Paris and Milan and also designers in South Korea, they don't want to own, all these stores. So they provide their clothes and their fashions and their designs to through obviously manufacturers to established department stores, Shinsegae, Macy's, etc. And those are the retailers. The alternative, of course, is to own the real estate, to own the whole store, and so forth, and that has its challenges. So there are vertically integrated companies, and there are companies that focus on their own product, and they work with intermediaries to then reach the consumer. So we mentioned about the intermediaries, and they can serve a very important role, and companies would prefer to have those intermediaries, but there is a very important process of disintermediation. We'll give some examples of that, and then we'll talk about multiple channels and alternate channels. So what is disintermediation? It's the removal of intermediary steps that we described, such as the wholesaler, the broker, the agent, the retailer, in a value chain, and to achieve more direct selling to consumers. They seem to be advantages: the lower purchase price transaction cost. You can keep some of those profits. You can potentially lower the costs, so potential price advantages, so you have market ability to increase market share. Of course, there are disadvantages, as we described, that if you take over those intermediary roles, you have to incur those costs and responsibilities. But if there are ways of true disintermediation, not just taking over those roles, but creating technology that takes out the intermediary, then you don't have to incur some of those costs. So if you're a manufacturer of sweaters going to the customer and you have a distributor and a retailer, the price might be $48. If you go directly from the manufacturer to the customer, the cost is $20. And this is true disintermediation, taking out the intermediates, as opposed to vertical integration, which is taking out the external intermediates and doing those intermediate processes on your own. So in true disintermediation, such as Amazon, it goes from the manufacturer directly via Amazon to the consumer, which is the end user. The traditional supply chain, which would involve the factory, the distributor, the wholesaler, the retail store. Wholesaler can sometimes go to the consumer, such as Costco or eMart traders. But in this model with disintermediation, you only have one intermediate, which is Amazon. And you can also talk about the delivery service as well. In general, the whole process of Amazon and related e-commerce, of course, is this disintermediation process. One of the key aspects of disintermediation is the marketing communications, is the promotion and connection to the consumer. So if you're a manufacturer and you're factories, communicating with the consumers is quite challenging. But with the internet and search engines and e-commerce platforms, etc., that communication obviously becomes more feasible. And so disintermediation, true disintermediation, has been enabled by technology. So we can also have multiple channels and alternate channels. So I gave those very linear channels, but a marketing strategy may involve multiple channels, both online and offline, complex distribution channels with multiple levels and multiple stages in the value chain, or direct to consumer. So this looks a little complicated, but we have agents, brokers, wholesalers, retail outlets, consumers, distributors, manufacturers, and many ways. You can go all the way direct. You can go to retail outlets. We can go to distributors and so forth. Now, the challenge here is a very important concept in marketing, is that of channel conflict. What is channel conflict? It is if you have multiple channels and alternate channels, and especially if they have different prices or different value propositions, there's an advantage that you can reach wider customers. We talked about that channel strategy to reach more customers. But the significant disadvantage is that then those channels can compete with each other. So particularly, for example, if you have an online channel and an offline channel, the offline channel would be the retail outlets selling to the consumers. The online channel might be the manufacturers directly to consumers. So these stores sell at a certain price. They have fixed labor and real estate costs, and their prices may be higher than the online. So if you're this manufacturer and you're working with stores, but you're also doing online, and the online is much lower price, the consumers get that directly from you, then these stores are not happy. They may not sell your product. They may compete with your product. They may get a competitor product and promote that, and you may end up compromising your relationships in the industry, and especially ultimately reducing your sales because of channel conflict. So just flooding the market and trying to get every channel sounds good in principle, but can raise significant problems. So the channel strategy also has to be combined with a promotion strategy, a co-branding strategy, and a pricing strategy that allows the channel conflict or minimizes the channel conflict and allows you to optimize the market entry and actually not do the opposite. And so this leads to the idea of alliances and partner ecosystems. So working not just in a transaction basis, but in an integrated relationship basis with other elements of the ecosystem. So we're going to talk first about the difference between a business partner versus a marketing partnership. Dual distribution, strategic channel alliances. We'll give some example of distribution channels at Samsung and partners, business ecosystems, marketing alliances, and then finish with another example of an airline alliances, such as Star Alliance or SkyTeam. So business partnerships and marketing partnerships, they're not the same, of course. Business partnerships can involve mergers between different companies, an acquisition of one company by another company, a strategic partnership, business partnership, which may have marketing aspects to it, a buyout, which is a form of acquisition in the public markets, a venture, so might be working with a startup, a kind of joint venture, or with another company to create a third company as a joint venture. These are business partnerships. Marketing partnerships involve things like co-branding. So for example, your computer might be made by Dell, but it has a label on it that says Intel inside. So you have co-branding of Dell and the Intel. You may have a Samsung computer. I have a Samsung computer on my laptop here. And on the Samsung computer, it has labels for Intel as well as Windows. So there's co-branding with Microsoft and Intel and Samsung. So it's a three-way partnership. Joint products. In a sense, Samsung assembles and makes this computer, but you can have joint products or two products coming together. Mutual targeting and also mutual promotion. You promote myself and I promote you. So for example, you may have product placement in movies. So in a action movie, you have a car chase and you may have an Audi in that movie. And so the movie is promoting the Audi with the superhero driving the Audi, etc. Car, automobile. But then Audi wants more people to watch the movie, and Audi can promote the movie as well as part of its marketing communications. So mutual co-promotion. So dual distribution is the use of two or more channels to distribute the same product to the same target market. So this dual distribution, as I mentioned, has challenges with respect to possible channel conflict. And then strategic channel alliance, where the products of one organization are distributed through the marketing channels of another. So one example of strategic channel alliance is Samsung phones or Huawei or LG being sold through the telecoms. So SK and KT in Korea selling Samsung phones. So that's a strategic channel alliance. Samsung is the producer and it distributes through these telecoms. So let's go through that example. This is Samsung distribution channels, working with distributors, then retailers, then to the customer through digital plazas. So that's a form of direct to consumer. And dealers, and not shown here are the telecoms, which then have their own retailers and so forth. So these are multiple distribution channels at Samsung. So that's a very important strategy that Samsung in general has multiple channels, multiple products. It tries to achieve the highest market share. Apple has a somewhat different strategy. It sells just through its Apple stores and through certain telecoms, that they have broadened their strategy somewhat, but traditionally they have much more exclusive, if you will, distribution channels, whereas Samsung's is more broad variety of distribution channels. So these partnerships are extremely important for business innovation, and innovation is closely related to marketing. So we talk about Silicon Valley, we talk about innovation centers around the world. There are some in Korea, in Pangyo, in Daejeon, and the financial district and so forth. Why do these come all together? Because they create the business ecosystem that facilitates these partnerships. So a business ecosystem builds on the core business. The extended enterprise are the direct customers and suppliers of your business, but the business ecosystem is very important. The trade associations, the investors, the government agencies, competing organizations, other stakeholders, labor unions, and this business ecosystem offers opportunities for these partnerships. So for example, Apple and Samsung are competitors when it comes to phones, but they are actually business partners when it comes to the constituents, the components for the iPhone. Samsung providing screens, Samsung providing memory chips, etc. They have made a decision that business partnership is not a marketing partnership. So Apple does not say Samsung inside, like an Intel inside. So it's more of a business partnership, not a marketing partnership. But the presence of an extensive ecosystem facilitates these partnerships, and is one of the reasons why some innovation hubs, some cities, some centers are very effective at creating new products as compared to others. So we talk about Silicon Valley, but they have a very extensive business ecosystem there that facilitates this. One thing they say, well, the culture of Silicon Valley, or very smart people there, or whatever it may be, but I believe that probably the single most important factor for the success of innovation and creating unicorns and big companies out of startups in Silicon Valley is a diverse business ecosystem that allows for these sorts of business partnerships and marketing partnerships. And innovation hubs that are more separate and don't facilitate these partnerships will be less successful. And of course, by extension, the companies that are in those ecosystems, those less effective ecosystems, will be less successful. So what are some examples of the marketing alliances that we refer to? There are product or service alliances. So for example, the Intel inside the Samsung, that's a product alliance. There's a promotional alliance, for example, putting the label of Intel on the Samsung computer. So for example, they made an agreement that Intel is going to sell the microprocessor to Samsung to put into the Samsung laptop, but then Samsung wants to keep the price low. They said, we want to have a lower price for your microprocessor because we'll buy in bulk, we'll buy a large quantity. And in addition, we'll put your label and we will promote Intel. That little label here, even though the label, I'm pointing to the label on my laptop. I don't know if you can see it, of course, but that little label may cost $10 because there's a promotional value to that label. Logistics alliances. So Amazon working with UPS, a delivery service. And it's interesting because that's a logistic alliance, but that alliance is broken down because Amazon is making drones and they want to deliver directly. They want to disintermediate not just the connection to the consumer, but they want to even disintermediate the delivery service. So that logistic alliance is actually breaking down. So Amazon makes a very strategic decision that they want to fully integrate that process. Pricing collaborations, that's a little bit tricky because there are elements of antitrust and collusion, but pricing collaborations, if it's done in a legal construct, can also serve as a marketing alliance. So finally, one example of a marketing alliance, of course, are the airlines. So Star Alliance is a marketing alliance of all of these global airlines. And the ones in Korea, the one in Korea is Asiana, as some of you may know, but it goes all the way from Adria to US Airways. A key member, of course, is United and Lufthansa. Continental and United have since merged. So this is an alliance of major airlines around the world. So how does that marketing alliance work? Well, there's code sharing so that one of the airlines can sell tickets for another airline. So that's a distribution channel. There's pricing. So again, that's tricky, but they can organize so that they offer lower prices to consumers based on working within the alliance. If you take flights outside the alliance, then the multiple flights, then the prices go higher. Services, for example, baggage being transported between airlines and not having to recheck the baggage. Obviously, mileage points for frequent flyer programs are integrated. Some aspects of logistics and the meal service and other business operations can also be coordinated together. So this is not just a business alliance, which has some components, but also a marketing alliance around promotion. You notice all the airlines will say Asiana Airlines, a member of Star Alliance. So they are promoting each other through this airline alliance. So some closing thoughts, the famous lines from poet John Donne: "No man is an island entire of itself, every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main." Very important to consider when you're starting your own business or you're working in a business, that even the most isolated companies have to partner with other companies, and that's becoming increasingly the case. And it's not about globalization. It can happen on a domestic level as well, but certainly globalization. So establishing a mindset and good examples we have in the readings that I've also posted of partnerships and partnership alliances is part of the present and future of good business and marketing. So this was a very important lecture because it highlights an important skill set, if you will, of partnering. And when you're doing the marketing plan and you're working online together as a group and presenting as a group, it is a form of partnership in order to get a good result. And bringing together pieces of what people are best in, relative competitive advantage, as the economists say, putting it together to create a better product, a better value, better experience for the consumer. So we talked about channels and partner ecosystems. Next week, we will talk about branding and customer experience. Extremely important. It's part of marketing communications. We're not fully complete with that subject, of course. And I want you to leave with one question you should think about in preparation for next week's lecture. And I'm going to ask this question during the discussion session. What is your personal brand? Uh, I'm not going to go through the whole lecture about branding, and so you may want to look up a little bit. I will post the readings as well. And based on what you understand about branding, think about what is your personal brand. And that's a motivating question for next week. So that's the lecture for channels and partner ecosystems. We're open for questions now.